I was 16 when my mother locked me outside barefoot in a Minnesota blizzard and said, "Cold will make you grateful." Snow bit at my ankles, the wind howled like it wanted me gone, and a red doorbell light blinked as if counting down my minutes. My brother's laughter echoed from the upstairs window, phone in hand, filming. Neighbours peeked from behind their curtains, then vanished into their warm rooms. I thought I might freeze to death. Maybe I did. The part of me that still believed silence could save me. I'm 38 now, and I have the proof they feared. The house felt like it was holding its breath when I stepped inside. The smell of overcooked green beans hung in the air, clinging to the steam that curled above the dinner table. Clara sat at the head, spine straight, fork tapping once against her plate before she set it down. Mason lounged across from her, scrolling on his phone until she cleared her throat. No one looked at me. No one had to. I already knew. Miss Abbott's email had landed before I walked through the door. She'd noticed the bruises along my arm during calculus. Asked if I was okay. I told her the truth. I hadn't meant to. The quiet at dinner was thicker than the snow piling outside. Clara's hands moved with careful precision, passing salad with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mason chewed slowly, his gaze sliding toward me like he was waiting for something. Dessert, maybe. Something cruel and sweet. When I stood to clear the plates, Clara's voice came, light but edged. "Harper, trash day tomorrow. Go bring the bin in from the curb." I glanced toward the window. Snow swirled under the streetlight, horizontal with the wind's force. The temperature had dropped hard since sunset. I was in my thinnest sweater, damp socks, jeans stiff from earlier slush. I hesitated. Just long enough for her smile to tighten. "Yes, Mum." The front door groaned when I opened it, the wind slapping me instantly, stealing my breath. Snow stung my cheeks, sharp as glass. I stepped out, head ducked against the gusts, my fingers curling into my sleeves. Behind me, the door clicked shut. I turned just in time to see her through the glass, arms folded, face calm as a frozen lake. Her lips moved. I didn't need the sound to know the words. "Cold will make you grateful." I knocked once, twice. "Clara, Mom, please, it's freezing." My voice cracked. Her expression didn't change. The deadbolt turned. Then the porch light blinked out, plunging the entryway into shadow. Panic snapped through me. I stumbled off the steps, slipping on the icy walkway, catching myself against the railing. My socks were soaked now, cold creeping upward like it wanted my bones. I rounded the house to the back door, locked, tried the garage, punched in the code. The keypad blinked red. She'd changed it. This wasn't anger. It was a plan. The Beck's house was closest. Their windows glowed golden, the hum of a TV spilling faintly into the night. I knocked hard, breath steaming in the air. A curtain shifted. Mrs. Beck's profile in the dim light. She froze, then vanished. No door opened. Snow soaked through to my skin. My feet burned, then began to dull. I crossed to the Whitakers. Their smart doorbell gleamed, the red recording light steady. I pressed it. A chime echoed inside. "Mrs. Whitaker, it's Harper Lane. I'm locked out. I need help." My teeth chattered through the words. The red light kept blinking. A shadow moved behind the front window curtain. For a second, I saw her face, lips parting as if to speak, her hand brushing the doorframe. Then the curtain fell back into place. I stood there, snow curling around my ankles, the wind pressing my hair against my face. The stone porch pulled the heat from me with relentless patience. My knees bent without permission, and I sank down, curling my arms tight around my chest. Somewhere above, A window scraped open. "Say cheese, Ice Queen," Mason's voice rang out. His laughter cut through the storm, high and sharp. The glow of his phone lit his face as he angled it down at me. I raised one hand in a half-hearted wave, my only weapon a flicker of sarcasm. The phone lens caught it all. The snow kept falling. My shivering slowed. The red light on the doorbell didn't blink faster or slower. It just watched, the way everyone else did. I woke to the antiseptic smell of a hospital room, the faint hiss of a heating unit working overtime. My legs were wrapped in heated blankets, an IV line dripping into my arm with mechanical patience. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, indifferent to my confusion. I had no idea how I'd gotten there. The last thing I remembered was the red glow of the Whitakers' doorbell and Mason's laugh slipping into the storm. Now my toes were bandaged, numb but aching deep inside. On the rolling table beside me lay my phone. I reached for it, fingers stiff from more than just the cold. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. Group chats, mentions, direct messages. My name was everywhere, not because anyone was worried. The first video auto-played before I could stop it. Mason's voice taunting, "Say cheese, Ice Queen." As the camera zoomed in on me huddled in the snow, he'd uploaded it to the school's group feed. The caption read, "Lil Snowflake having a meltdown." The comments stacked underneath, "Savage, that's your sister? She's always been like that, right?" My chest hollowed out as I scrolled. Not one person asked why I was outside in socks in the middle of a blizzard. They just laughed. The knock on my hospital door came soft, almost polite. A nurse peeked in, her scrubs rustling. "You've got mail," she said with a small smile, handing me an envelope and a plastic container of brownies. "From one of your neighbours." I opened the card first. A cheerful hallmark with "Thinking of you" in looping script. Inside, a short message. "For your brother. We're so proud of how he's handled all this. Signed, Mrs. Beck." The brownies weren't for me. When the nurse left, I sat there, staring at the card. The ache in my feet, nothing compared to the weight in my chest. I was the one in the hospital bed, yet the community had already decided who the hero was. The confirmation came a few hours later in the form of an email forwarded from my homeroom teacher. Subject line, "Celebrating integrity." It was from the principal, congratulating Mason for maintaining composure under family stress and not retaliating publicly when targeted. My frozen collapse had been repackaged into proof of his moral strength. Clara must have worked fast to seed that narrative. Gaslighting wasn't just a family sport anymore, it was a neighbourhood pastime. The realisation settled over me like a second frost. I wasn't just locked out of the house that night, I was locked out of the truth, out of my own story. The version of events that mattered was already being told, and I wasn't the one telling it. I reached for the rolling table again, this time for the paper notepad a nurse had left. My handwriting was clumsy, but I began listing everything I remembered. The time Clara told me to get the trash bin, the colour of the snow under the street lamp, the click of the deadbolt, the face in the Whitakers' window, the way Mason's laugh carried over the wind. Every detail mattered. I numbered the page, 1.223. The date burned into my memory. Underneath, I wrote in block letters, "They will twist it if I don't write it first." Somewhere between the smell of antiseptic and the glow of my phone screen, I decided I would not be erased. I didn't know yet how I'd use these notes, whether they'd end up in a police report, a courtroom, or nowhere at all. But they would exist. My voice would exist, even if only in ink at first. That night, I didn't scroll through the comments again. I let my phone face down on the table, the blank notepad open beside me. Outside the window, snow still fell in sheets, but in here I was finally holding a pen. Back home, the apartment felt smaller than I remembered, the walls too close, the air too still. I set my hospital bag down and went straight to the desk in the corner. The notepad from the hospital lay on top, its first page already filled with the night's timeline. I pulled open a drawer and took out a thicker, spiral-bound notebook. If the scraps in the hospital were survival notes, this one would be my evidence ledger. I wrote the date at the top and started listing names. Clara Lane, Mason Lane, Mrs. Beck, Mrs. Whitaker, each with bullet points underneath. Times, exact words, the tone they used, the lies they told. I didn't trust my memory to hold everything in order. Paper didn't get nervous. Paper didn't second-guess itself. Hours passed. My handwriting cramped, but I kept going. For each entry, I left space for proof. Screenshots, photos, messages, anything. I wasn't sure yet how much would survive the inevitable attempts to erase it. But I knew what my first major piece of evidence could be, the gratitude journal. I dug through a storage bin under my bed until I found it. Pale blue cover, the edges curled, faint smell of lavender from the spray Clara had used to make thankfulness smell sweet. The title page was in her handwriting, Harper's gratitude journal with a smiley face that now looked more like a smirk. At first, the entries were harmless. I'm grateful Mom makes my favourite pancakes. I'm grateful Mason walks me to the bus stop. But as the months went by, the tone shifted. My own writing became stiffer, like it was holding its breath. I'm grateful Mom reminds me not to be selfish. I'm grateful Mason teaches me to stay quiet. Then somewhere in the middle I found it, a page that made my fingers go still. A crude crayon drawing, a stick figure girl curled up on a rectangle, blue scribbles surrounding her like a storm. Above the scene, a single red dot hovered. The lines were wobbly, childish, but unmistakable. I'd drawn it before the night in the snow, back when the doorbell camera was new and the winter still felt magical. I didn't know why I'd put that red dot there then. Now it felt like prophecy. I took a picture of the page and added it to my ledger under pre-event evidence. My hand shook a little as I wrote the note beside it. Proof of long-term conditioning and premeditation. The next step was obvious. I opened my phone, scrolled to the neighbourhood contacts list, and found Mrs. Whitaker's number. My message was short and polite. Hi, Mrs. Whitaker. I hope you're doing okay. I was wondering if there's any chance the footage from your doorbell camera on the night of January 14th still exists. It could really help. I'd be very grateful. I watched the delivered icon sit there. Hours passed. No reply. By evening, I sent a second message, just checking in. I really need that video if it still exists. Thank you. 5 hours later, her name lit up my screen. For a brief moment, my chest lifted in hope. Then I opened it. I'm sorry, I don't want to get involved. 7 words. That was it. I stared at them until the phone dimmed. My fingers itched to type back. You already were involved, but I didn't. I didn't have to. The words were already in my ledger, under her name, dated and timed. It wasn't just her, the Becks, the Carters, the Gwynns. Every neighbour who'd seen me outside that night had chosen the same role, spectator. Clara hadn't just locked me out, she'd locked them into silence. I closed the notebook and sat back, listening to the faint hum of my radiator. Outside, the snow was falling again, erasing footprints, covering everything in the same cold disguise. Inside, my own footprints, the paper trail, were just beginning. The next morning, I walked into the Duluth Police Precinct clutching my ledger. The fluorescent-lit lobby smelled faintly of coffee and melting snow. Behind the counter, a receptionist waved me toward a side hallway. That's where I met Sergeant Elena Ruiz. She had the kind of presence that didn't need volume, steady eyes, posture that suggested she'd heard more than she ever wanted to. She offered me a chair and a mug of tea, which I declined, afraid my hands would shake and spill it. "So, Harper," she said, flipping open a fresh notepad, "tell me what's been going on." I outlined the night of the blizzard, the silence of the neighbours, the video I knew existed. She listened without interrupting, jotting short phrases as I spoke. When I mentioned the gratitude journal, her pen paused mid-word. "That's psychological conditioning," she said quietly. "It's hard to prove, but if we can document it, it helps." I slid the crayon drawing across the table. This was before the night it happened. I didn't know what it meant then. Now I do. She studied it for a long moment, then nodded. "Keep that safe." Just as I was beginning to feel like someone was on my side, her phone buzzed. She excused herself to take the call in the hallway. I caught only fragments of her voice before she returned, her expression more guarded than before. "That was your mother," she said, sitting down. "She came in this morning with a flash drive, claims it's footage from your home." My stomach tightened. "What's on it?" "I haven't reviewed it yet," Ruiz said, "but she described you yelling, throwing books, said it was recent, part of a pattern of emotional instability." I knew exactly what video it was. "A year ago," I said flatly. "The day my dog died." "She didn't mention that part, did she?" Ruiz's silence was answer enough. By the time I left the station, my phone had already caught the ripple effect. The local paper's website had a new article. Clara Lane, Grace Under Pressure. A photo showed her outside the precinct, one hand on her chest as if in prayer. The piece described her as a pillar of calm, navigating the challenges of raising a troubled teen. The comment section swarmed with strangers praising her composure. It was the same game she'd played my entire life. Get ahead of the truth, polish it until it gleamed, and hold it up as the only version worth believing. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was taking notes. Later that week, during a follow-up at the hospital, a nurse I hadn't seen before came to check my vitals. She was in her 40s, with tired eyes, and a voice soft enough to make the room feel warmer. As she wrapped the cuff around my arm, she glanced at my chart and frowned. "You know," she said carefully, "your file lists previous frostbite." I blinked. "No, it doesn't. This is the first time." She shook her head. "ER visit when you were 12. Mild hypothermia, early stage frostbite. It's flagged here as unreported incident." For a moment I couldn't speak. The smell of snow and the sting of cold from years ago slammed back into me. I hadn't remembered it as anything more than an unusually long wait to be let inside. She hesitated, then said, "I thought you should know. Patterns matter." When she left, I sat in the quiet and stared at the chart until the words blurred. Then I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. 2, 3, just in case. In my ledger, under medical records, I wrote, "Evidence of repeated exposure to dangerous cold. Neglect pattern established. This wasn't just one night in the snow. It was a cycle, years in the making. And now I had proof." The first thing I did when I got home was open my laptop and type, "How long does Ring doorbell footage last?" The answer stared back at me, up to 60 days unless manually deleted. I checked the calendar. It had been 22 days since the night of the blizzard. That left 38. 38 days to convince Mrs. Whittaker to do the right thing. 38 days before the proof vanished into some cloud server's oblivion. I wrote the number in bold at the top of my ledger, 38. Each day I would cross one out. The countdown wasn't just about time, it was about leverage, about knowing exactly how long I had before her polite refusal turned into permanent erasure. But pressure alone wouldn't make her hand over the footage. I needed to make the night real to people who'd never stood on that porch, who didn't feel the cold crawling into their bones. I couldn't post the clip, I didn't have it. But I did have one photo. It was grainy, taken with my phone in a brief moment when the porch light was still on. My silhouette huddled in the corner, knees pulled to my chest, snow stacked high along the railing. The red glow of the doorbell hovered like an indifferent witness. I uploaded it to Instagram. No caption, no hashtags, just the image. At first, it got the usual likes from people who clicked without thinking. Then the comments started. Haunting. Is this art or real? Looks staged. This feels wrong. Like I shouldn't be looking at it. Someone shared it to a photography forum. From there, it spilled onto Twitter, Reddit, even a few Tumblr blogs that specialised in found images. The debates got louder. Was it conceptual, art, performance, or documentary? I didn't answer. The ambiguity kept them talking. By the second day, the photo had been reposted dozens of times, each with its own interpretation. Some framed it as a commentary on isolation in modern life. Others guessed it was a metaphor for climate change. A few nailed the truth without realising it, writing about domestic exile and the violence of indifference. I watched from behind the glass, never stepping into the conversation. Let them guess. Every reshare was another chance for the image to land in the feed of someone who knew the truth, or at least knew me. On the third day, my phone buzzed with a DM from a name I hadn't seen since sophomore year. Tessa Murphy. We'd sat next to each other in biology, sharing whispered complaints about the smell of formaldehyde. Hey, I saw this photo on my friend's feed. It looks like your mum's porch. Is that you? I stared at the message for a full minute. Tessa had been part of Mason's circle, friendly enough to me in class, but silent when the teasing started. Yes, I typed back, from this year, January. Her typing bubble appeared, then vanished. Then I thought, Mason said you were just acting out, that you wanted attention. That's what he'd say, I replied. She didn't respond again, but I didn't need her to. The photo had done what I needed. It breached the wall between the version of events Clara had sold and the truth I carried. By the end of the week, even strangers were tagging me, asking for the story. I ignored most of them, but I kept every notification. The wider it spread, the more likely it was to reach the one person who could end the countdown. I glanced at the ledger. Day 38 was crossed out. Day 37 stared back at me, a silent reminder. The red light on that doorbell wasn't just in the past. It was still blinking in my head, ticking towards 0. On day 35 of the countdown, I broke my own rule. Up until then, I'd let the photo speak for me, no captions, no explanations. But that morning, I opened my laptop, pulled up a blank post, and typed my name in the first line. My name is Harper Lane. I am the girl in that photo. I wrote about the night of January 14th, about the blizzard and the deadbolt, about the neighbour's curtains snapping shut. I didn't mention Clara by name, but I didn't need to. Anyone who'd been within 5 blocks that night knew exactly which house had the red light blinking on its porch. It took less than an hour for the post to start gaining traction. People shared it alongside the photo, connecting the dots between the image and the reality. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about whether the picture was art, it was about the cruelty behind it. By the end of the day, it was gone. I woke up the next morning to an email from a law firm in Clara's city. Cold, precise language. Your post constitutes defamation and a violation of privacy, causing reputational damage. Remove immediately or face legal action. The platform had already pulled it. I sat there staring at the notice, my coffee going cold. They didn't even bother to deny the events. They just framed the truth as an attack. But here's the thing about the internet. Nothing ever really disappears. Screenshots of my post began to surface within hours, reposted on accounts I'd never heard of. Some were blurred just enough to dodge takedowns, others were bold, tagging the law firm directly. The more Clara tried to erase it, the faster it spread. That night, I printed the takedown notice and pinned it to the corner of my bathroom mirror. In thick black marker, I scrawled across it, "You taught me gratitude. I'm returning the lesson." Every morning after, I brushed my teeth with those words in view. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was proof that she no longer controlled the narrative entirely. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was from my hometown. I pressed play. "Hey, Harper. I don't know if you remember me. It's Anna from junior year." We sat next to each other in AP Bio. Her voice wavered like she wasn't sure she should be calling at all. I saw that clip, the one from the porch. I had no idea what you were going through. I thought you were just, dramatic. That's what everyone said. That's what she made it sound like. I'm sorry I believed her." There was a pause, the faint sound of her breathing. I should have said something back then. I should have asked if you were okay. I hope you're okay now. The message ended without a goodbye. I replayed it twice, not because the words were particularly grand, they weren't, but because they cracked something open I hadn't realised was sealed shut. Anna had been one of the many who'd stood on the periphery, not throwing stones, but never stepping in either. Hearing her voice now, unsure and unpolished, was a reminder that not every silence came from malice. Some of it came from ignorance, from fear, from the easy comfort of believing the simplest story. It didn't undo anything. It didn't bring back the 38 days I'd been counting down. But it did shift the weight, just a little. Not everyone believed Clara, and not everyone who once did still did now. When I crossed off day 34 in the ledger that night, I didn't feel like I was racing against the clock alone anymore. Somewhere out there, one more voice had stopped whispering and started listening, and that mattered. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, just as I was sorting through the stack of mail on my kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognise, but the area code pulled something loose in my memory. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. On the fourth ring, I answered. "Harper?" a voice said, low and uncertain. It's Dad, Daniel." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I hadn't heard that voice in over 20 years, not since the night he left without warning. My memories of him were fractured, flashes of laughter, the smell of sawdust from his workshop, and then the echo of Clara's voice telling everyone he was unstable, dangerous, unreliable. "I saw the photo," he continued. The one on the porch. I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I mean, I knew she was capable of..." His voice trailed off. "Of what?" I asked. "Of breaking people," he said. "It's why I left. He hesitated, exhaling sharply. I thought if I got out, she might focus on herself, maybe even find someone new. I didn't think she'd turn it all on you. There it was, the explanation I'd imagined in 100 different ways over the years, none of them satisfying. We agreed to meet the next morning at a diner, halfway between our towns. The diner smelled like coffee that had been sitting on a hot plate, too long, and bacon just starting to burn. Vinyl booths lined the windows, the seats patched with duct tape in places. He was already there when I walked in, sitting with a mug in front of him and a manila envelope at his side. "Hi, Harper," he said, standing halfway before sitting again, unsure if he had the right to close the space between us. "You look older," I said, before I could stop myself. "So do you." He gave a small, sad smile. For a while, we just looked at each other, searching for the missing years in the lines on each other's faces. "She did the same thing to me," he finally said. "Not with snow, though God knows she's cold enough for it, but with silence, with rules, with this constant image management. She told people I cheated, that I was emotionally unstable. She made me a ghost before I was even gone." "And then you left," I said, my voice flat. He winced. "I know, I hate myself for that. I thought I was saving us both by disappearing. I thought maybe you'd be better off without me in her sights." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that his absence had been its own kind of wound. But the truth was complicated. Clara had been a storm, and storms didn't care who they destroyed as long as something was left broken. Without a word, Daniel slid the manila envelope across the table. I opened it to find a photograph. Me, maybe 2 years old, bundled in a puffy blue coat. He was holding me up in front of a snow-covered tree. My cheeks were round, my mouth open in a laugh, so unrestrained it almost hurt to look at. "That," he said, "was the last day she let me take you out alone. The next morning, she told me I'd never see you without her there again." I stared at the photo, the winter scene behind us so bright and clean, it almost mocked the memory of another snow years later. The one where I was 16, barefoot, locked out, and invisible to the world. 2 snapshots of winter, separated by 14 years, one full of joy, one full of frostbite. "She can take away time," I said quietly, "but she can't take this." He nodded, his hands curling around his coffee mug. "What are you going to do now?" "What no one ever did for you," I said. "I'm going to speak." That night, after coming back from the diner, I sat at my desk with the photograph of me and Daniel propped against the wall. The smile in it felt like a stranger's. I opened my laptop and pulled up the photos I'd taken of the ER chart. The one the nurse had shown me, the one marking mild hypothermia from when I was 12. I paired it with a current picture of my frostbitten toes, still healing, and began to write. The post was blunt. "This is what history looks like when no one asks questions." I was 12 the first time, 16 the second. Both times my mother called it discipline. Both times the people around us called it a family matter. I hit post before I could overthink it. It took less than an hour for the first share to come in. By the end of the night, the post had spread beyond my own circle. A regional child welfare organisation reposted it with the caption, "Patterns Matter. Believe survivors." The social workers' union chimed in. "We stand with Harper Lane." My notifications were a blur. Messages from strangers, survivors of their own family matters. People thanking me for putting words to something they'd lived but never spoken about. For the first time in weeks, I felt the countdown in my ledger pause, not because the clock had stopped, but because I wasn't alone in watching it tick down. 2 days later, an email landed in my inbox from an address I didn't recognise. The subject line was simply coffee. The body read, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m, Cornerstone Cafe. Ask for me." A neighbour I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was suspicion. Clara had plenty of allies, and baiting me into a meeting wouldn't be beneath her. Still, the wording was careful, and the fact they didn't sign a name was curious. The next morning, I went. Cornerstone Cafe was small, the kind of place where the scent of cinnamon rolls seeped into the wood. A bell jingled over the door as I walked in. I scanned the tables until I saw her. Mrs. Whitaker. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pinned up, scarf neatly tucked into her coat. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch, just gestured to the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice quiet. "I wasn't sure I should," I answered. For a moment, we just sat there, the sound of the espresso machine filling the space between us. "I've watched it every night since that day," she said finally. "The footage. I couldn't sleep after it happened. I thought about calling, about stepping in, but I was scared of her, of Clara." I didn't let her off the hook. "You didn't have to be scared to open a door." She nodded, looking down at her coffee. "I know, that's why I asked you here." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive, sliding it across the table. "I saved it before she started calling people, before the story changed. I thought, maybe one day you'd need it. I didn't help you that night, but maybe this will help someone else." For a second, I just stared at it, the tiny piece of plastic that could shatter the version of events Clara had built so carefully. "Why now?" I asked. Her eyes were wet when she met mine. "Because I can't keep pretending I wasn't part of it. Silence is part of it." I took the drive, slipping it into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried not just the footage, but the weight of her belated courage. When I left the cafe, the cold bit at my cheeks, but it didn't feel as sharp as the day Clara had locked me out. This time, I was walking away with a key. I waited until the apartment was completely quiet before plugging the USB into my laptop. The drive clicked into place and a folder popped open with a single file, Front Porch 011423.mp4. My pulse thudded in my ears as I double-clicked. The video filled the screen, and for the first time, I saw the night as an outsider. The frame caught the porch perfectly, the stone floor already dusted with snow, the faint halo of the overhead light. Then there I was, 16, stepping into the frame. My sweater clung damp against me, my socks already dark with meltwater. I rang the bell once, twice, 5 times. The audio was crisp enough to hear my teeth chattering between words. "Mrs. Whitaker, it's Harper Lane. I'm locked out. Please." "Off camera," Clara's voice cut in, faint but clear. "She needs to learn. Let her stay out." I felt my jaw tighten. Even after all this time, the calm in her tone made my skin crawl. A laugh followed. Mason's. The sound of a window creaking open, then his voice, dripping with mockery. "Say cheese, Ice Queen." I watched myself flinch, pulling my arms tighter around my knees. The wind roared through the mic, carrying the sound of the upstairs window closing again. After that, nothing but the storm and the faint hum of a TV from somewhere inside. The timestamp in the corner ticked on. 10 minutes, 15, 25. My movements slowed. My head drooped forward. At 35 minutes, I tipped sideways out of frame. The porch stayed empty until the file cut off. I didn't realise I'd been holding my breath until the video ended. Opening my editing software, I added subtitles. Every word, every sound. Let her stay out. Say cheese. Ice Queen. The captions appeared in stark white against the grey of the storm. I didn't add commentary, I didn't need to. When it was ready, I exported the file and uploaded it to my social media accounts. No caption, no hashtags. Just the truth in 35 minutes of unbroken footage. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then the comments began trickling in. This can't be real. 35 minutes. Where's the mother? Oh, my stomach hurts watching this. By the end of the night, the video was everywhere. Activists retweeted it. Journalists DM'd me asking for permission to run it in their reports. A child welfare group pinned it to their feed. But the thing I didn't expect was what came next. Someone dug up the crayon drawing from my gratitude journal. The one with the stick figure girl, the blue scribbles for snow, and the single red dot. They posted it side by side with a still from the video, the red glow of the doorbell in the same place as in the drawing. The caption read, "She told the truth before anyone listened." It hit harder than the footage. The video showed suffering. The drawing showed foresight, the kind of instinct a child shouldn't have to develop. The image pair began spreading faster than the footage itself. People changed their profile pictures to the drawing. A teacher wrote that she was using it in her classroom to talk about warning signs we ignore. Someone else painted a mural in their neighbourhood, 10 feet high. The blue crayon lines stretching across a brick wall. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was a symbol, a shorthand for every time a child's voice got lost in the noise of adult excuses. I scrolled through the comments late into the night, my laptop warming my legs as snow tapped at the window. For the first time since the countdown began, I felt like I was ahead of Clara, even if only by a step. The video was proof, but the drawing, that was the heart, and hearts move people in ways facts alone can't. When I finally shut the laptop, I glanced at the ledger on my desk. The number left on the countdown was almost irrelevant now. The truth was already out there, and it wasn't going back in. Within days, the video and the crayon drawing had broken past my town's borders. National news outlets ran segments on it, weaving my footage into discussions about child neglect and the limits of discipline. A prominent advocacy group for youth safety used still frames from the porch video in their latest campaign. On one podcast, a child psychologist dissected Clara's calm tone in those 35 minutes, calling it premeditated emotional cruelty. Then came the email from Mason's school board. I wasn't CC'd, but a teacher I still kept in touch with forwarded it. Mason was suspended for online misconduct and failure to report suspected abuse. The official language was dry, but the effect was seismic. I didn't feel satisfaction so much as a strange, hollow quiet. Mason wasn't the architect of the story, Clara was, but he'd been a willing cameraman, a chorus to her stage play. And now, for the first time, he was facing even a fraction of the consequences. Reporters began circling back to people in my old neighbourhood. At first, they refused to comment. Then, slowly, cracks formed in the wall of silence. One afternoon, as I was coming back from the grocery store, I found a letter slipped under my apartment door. No return address, just my name in a looping hand I recognised immediately, Mrs. Beck. Harper, it read, I can't undo what I didn't do that night. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't have the full story. I see now that I was protecting myself from the truth. I'm sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. Another neighbour, Mr. Carter, left a voicemail saying he'd spoken to a reporter because The least I can do is tell them what I saw. Not everyone came forward. Not everyone apologised. But enough did that I could feel the weight shift again, this time towards something like accountability. On a grey Thursday morning, I drove back to the street I hadn't set foot on in years. Snow was melting in slow rivulets along the curbs, the air damp with the smell of thawing earth. When I pulled up in front of the old house, I cut the engine and just sat there for a moment. The porch had been repainted a pale blue, the railing repaired where the wood used to splinter under your hand. A wreath of artificial pine cones hung on the door. I stepped out of the car and onto the sidewalk, my boots sinking slightly into the slush. Standing at the foot of the steps, I let my eyes travel to the spot where I'd once curled up, freezing, praying someone would open the door. For a second I imagined lifting my hand to knock, just to hear the sound echo through the wood, to prove I could now. But I didn't. This wasn't about being let in. I let my hand rest lightly on the railing, feeling the smoothness of the new paint under my palm. The house was different now, but it carried the same shape, the same bones. I pictured the red light of the doorbell camera blinking steady as my breath slowed in the storm. The moment stretched, then I let go. As I turned back toward my car, I felt no pull to look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. The porch wasn't mine anymore, not as a prison and not as a story. I had taken it back the only way that mattered, by telling it in my own words, on my own terms. When I drove away, the house shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just another shape on a street I no longer belonged to. The past was still there, but so was I. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon-scented disinfectant, the kind used to cover up years of scuffed floors and coffee spills. Reporters clustered near the entrance, their badges swinging on lanyards, microphones poised like weapons. I didn't dodge them. I walked straight through. My attorney a step behind me, the weight of the USB drive's contents still etched in my mind. Inside, the courtroom was a low hum of whispered speculation. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, neighbours who had once shut their blinds, a teacher who'd believed Clara's version without question, even a former classmate who'd once laughed along with Mason's friends. Clara sat at the defence table in an ivory blouse, her hair pinned back neatly, her expression unreadable but composed. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a face carved into stern lines, called us to order. The prosecution rose first. "Your Honour, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor began, her voice even but firm. "This case is about deliberate harm. The charges are child endangerment and emotional abuse. The evidence will show that the defendant, Clara Lane, knowingly left her 16-year-old daughter outside during a severe snowstorm without shoes or a coat for 35 minutes. This was not discipline. This was cruelty. She walked them through the framework, the weather conditions that night, the deadbolt locking, the deliberate refusal to let me in, and the psychological tactics used before and after to discredit me. Her words were steady, the facts like bricks laid in a wall that even Clara's polished composure couldn't dismantle. Then it was the defence's turn. Clara's attorney, a man with a perfect knot in his tie and an unblinking stare, rose with the practiced sigh of someone who believed in his own inevitability. "This," he said, gesturing toward me as though I were an abstract concept, "is a family dispute that has been blown out of proportion. What we have here is a troubled household, yes, but not a criminal one. The alleged incident was a misunderstanding, a momentary lapse in judgment, coloured now by the bitterness of estrangement. We urge you not to confuse a family's private struggles with felony behaviour. Troubled household. Private struggles. The phrases landed in the air like a fog meant to obscure everything sharp. The judge signalled to proceed with evidence. That's when the prosecution requested to play the video. The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered to life. There I was, 16, barefoot, the snow thick around me. My breath turned to steam as I rang the bell over and over. The jury leaned forward slightly. Through the speakers came Clara's voice. Calm, deliberate. She needs to learn. Let her stay out. Then Mason's laugh echoing above the wind. Say cheese, Ice Queen. The footage didn't cut away. 10 minutes passed on the timestamp. 15:25. My movements slowed until I was still, my head drooping forward. At 35 minutes, I slipped out of frame. The screen went black. The silence in the room after the video ended was different from the usual courtroom quiet. It was heavier, as if the oxygen itself had thickened. You could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system above us. The prosecutor let the silence linger before saying, "No further questions." Then Mrs. Whitaker was called to the stand. She walked with the careful steps of someone carrying something fragile inside them. When she sat, she kept her hands clasped, her knuckles pale. "Mrs. Whitaker," the prosecutor began, "did you record this footage?" "Yes," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "And why did you not intervene that night?" Her eyes flickered toward me before returning to the prosecutor. "I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself she," a brief glance at Clara, "would handle it. But I knew deep down that I was staying out of it to protect myself from her. I didn't think not helping would become part of the harm." The prosecutor nodded. "And yet, you kept a copy of the video?" "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "because I couldn't stop thinking about it, because I knew some day she might need it." When she stepped down from the stand, she didn't look at Clara, she looked at me, her eyes shining with something halfway between apology and relief. The defence cross-examined her, trying to frame her testimony as a product of public pressure. But the 35 minutes of unbroken footage had already done its work. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was proof. And in that room, proof spoke louder than anyone's polished denial. When it was my turn to take the stand, the courtroom felt colder than the day outside. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and settled into the witness chair. The prosecutor gave me a moment before asking the first question. "Harper, can you describe that night for the jury?" I didn't glance at Clara. I kept my eyes on the panel in front of me, my voice even. It was January 14th. The temperature was minus 15 degrees with the wind chill. My mother told me to get to the trash bin from the curb. I was wearing socks and a sweater. When I stepped outside, she locked the door. I described the pounding on the glass, the trip to the back door, the keypad that no longer worked. I told them about the Bex's curtain sliding shut and the steady red blink of the Whitakers' doorbell. For 35 minutes, I said, no one came. The prosecutor let the words hang. Why do you think she did that? She said cold would make me grateful. I didn't raise my voice. It didn't. It made me understand something else, that silence doesn't save anyone. Evidence does. A murmur rippled through the gallery, quickly hushed by the judge. When the defence had their turn, they tried to twist my words into rebellion, into dramatics. "Ms. Lane," the attorney said, "isn't it true you and your mother had frequent disagreements? That you sometimes raised your voice, slammed doors?" "Disagreements aren't crimes," I answered. Locking your child outside in a blizzard is. He didn't push it further. The video had already stolen the breath from the room. Closing arguments came quicker than I expected. The prosecutor reminded the jury that they weren't there to mediate a family quarrel. They were there to decide if a mother had endangered her child and inflicted emotional harm. She played the clip one more time, no commentary, just the wind, the red light, and my shivering frame. The defence clung to the family matter argument, calling it a lapse in judgment rather than a pattern. But every juror had seen the timestamps. They'd heard Clara's voice, steady as stone. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, I stepped into the hallway with my attorney. I'd been told these things could take hours, sometimes days. But after only 70 minutes, the bailiff called us back in. The room went still as the foreperson stood. On the charge of felony child endangerment, she read, we find the defendant, Clara Lane, guilty. Clara didn't flinch. On the charge of misdemeanor emotional abuse, we find the defendant guilty. The judge's sentencing came swiftly, years in state prison, with no eligibility for early release. The gavel struck like the closing of a door, but for once it wasn't on me. When we stepped outside, the press surged forward, microphones and cameras jostling for position. My attorney tried to shield me, but I stepped around her. Record now, I said, locking eyes with the nearest camera. I'll speak. The questions started flying, but I didn't wait for prompts. For years, my story was told by people who weren't living it. Neighbours, classmates, even family decided what version was most comfortable to believe. I was locked outside for 35 minutes in a blizzard while people watched from warm windows. My mother called it discipline. I call it what it was, abuse. The flashes from the cameras were blinding, but I didn't look away. Silence didn't save me. Evidence did. If you see something like this, you speak, you open the door, you don't wait for someone else to do it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The microphones caught every word. And the crowd caught the steadiness in them. When I turned to leave, I passed by Mrs. Whittaker, standing at the edge of the steps. She gave me a small nod, not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging what had happened here today. I walked down the courthouse steps into a cold wind that felt nothing like that night years ago. This time I wasn't alone, and this time the door had closed behind her, not me. Ada Finch lived on the far edge of town in a small, single-storey house with faded blue siding and a porch swing that creaked when the wind caught it. I'd met her only twice before, once at a community meeting, once when she'd stopped me in the grocery store to say she'd seen my video. She didn't use the word sorry, but her eyes had held it. When she heard the verdict, she called me. I've got a spare room, she said. It's not fancy, but it's warm, and I don't lock people out. The first night I arrived, the smell of tomato soup greeted me before she even opened the door. It's not gourmet, she said, handing me a steaming bowl, but it's hot, and I didn't spit in it. Her voice had the kind of dry humour that slips in like sunlight under a door. Her house was nothing like the one I grew up in. The carpet had seen better decades, the kitchen tiles were mismatched, and the recliner in the corner looked like it had been there longer than either of us. But every detail radiated a quiet permission. Leave a mug on the counter, laugh too loud, fall asleep with a book on your chest. That first week I found myself exhaling in ways I didn't know I'd been holding back. No one tracked how long I stayed in the shower. No one commented on how many times I refilled my tea. There was no unspoken ledger where kindness had to be repaid with obedience. One evening, we sat on her porch as the sun sank, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. She lit a cigarette, tapping it lightly against the ashtray. "You can stay," she said without looking at me. "For dinner?" I teased. She smiled. "For real, as long as you need." The offer landed deep in my chest, heavier than it sounded. I thought of all the places I'd lived that never felt like mine. Rooms where every object was borrowed, every gesture conditional. This was different. "I might take you up on that," I said. "I hope you do," she replied, flicking ash into the tray. 2 months later, I walked across a small stage in the community centre's multi-purpose room. It wasn't a grand graduation, just the completion of a restorative education program that let me finish the credits I'd lost in the chaos. No cap and gown, no rows of cameras flashing. Just folding chairs, a microphone, and a handful of people who'd shown up because they cared. When the organizer asked if I wanted to say a few words, my first instinct was to shake my head. Public speaking had never been my goal. Surviving had. But then I remembered the girl in the porch video, the one whose breath fogged in the cold, whose voice cracked as she begged to be let in. She hadn't wanted applause either. She just wanted to be heard. So I stood. "My name is Harper Lane," I began. "And I used to think gratitude was something you owed to people who gave you the bare minimum. Food, shelter, a roof over your head. I was taught to say thank you even when I was hurting, to smile when I was scared, to be quiet when I was freezing." I paused, meeting the eyes of a few people in the front row. But I've learned something since then. Gratitude isn't obedience. It isn't silence. And it sure as hell isn't survival. Gratitude is what you feel when someone sees you, not when they punish you and call it love. A few people nodded, one woman dabbing at her eyes. "I forgive her," I said, but I don't forget. And that's how I stay whole. When I stepped down, the applause was warm, unhurried. Edda was waiting at the edge of the stage, leaning on her cane with a grin. "Not bad, Lane," she said. "Not bad at all." That night, back at her house, I set the small paper certificate on the kitchen counter. It wasn't the kind of achievement Clara would have framed, but it was mine. And for the first time, that was enough. In a state prison 2 counties away, the television in the common room flickered with muted colours. The camera feed showed a grainy clip of me on stage, delivering the speech I'd given at the community centre. The caption at the bottom read, "Local graduate speaks on survival and gratitude." Clara sat alone at one of the plastic tables, her tray pushed to the side. The room was half full, the low din of other inmates talking over the hum of fluorescent lights. She didn't look away from the screen. Her face was unreadable, but her hands, resting on the tabletop, were still too still. For the first time since her sentencing, no one had come to visit her. Not Mason, not the neighbours who once sang her praises, not even the church friends who had called her inspirational in the comment sections of news articles. The clip replayed, and my words echoed from the small TV speakers. Gratitude isn't obedience. I forgive her, but I don't forget. Clara's gaze stayed locked on the image of me stepping down from the stage, accepting the quiet applause. If she felt anything, she didn't show it. But the fact that she was watching at all felt like its own kind of acknowledgement. A concession, however small, that she no longer held the script. A few weeks later, on a soft spring afternoon, I found myself driving a route I hadn't taken in years. The air smelled faintly of thawed soil and new grass, the kind of scent that makes you think winter was only a bad dream. Without planning to, I turned onto the street where the old house stood. It looked different now. The paint on the siding was fresh, the garden bed along the porch lined with bright tulips. A small plastic car sat on the lawn, tipped on its side as if abandoned mid-adventure. As I slowed, a movement in the window caught my eye. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, stood with her hands pressed to the glass. She had a mass of dark curls and wide, curious eyes. When she saw me, she grinned and lifted one hand in a wave. I felt my chest tighten, but not from the kind of ache I'd known before. I smiled and waved back, holding the gesture just long enough for her to see it was meant for her. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. The house wasn't mine anymore. Not as a prison, not as a wound. It belonged to someone else now. And the life inside it was not my responsibility to save or mourn. As I turned the corner, the image of her small hand against the glass stayed with me. In another life, another version of this street, that hand could have been mine. But this wasn't another life. This was the one I had, and I'd walked far enough from the cold that I didn't need anyone's apology to keep going. Later that night, sitting at Edda's kitchen table with a cup of tea, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not for the police, not for lawyers, not even for the organisations that had shared my posts. This was for anyone who might find themselves where I had been. On the wrong side of a locked door, told that silence was their safest choice. If you have been cast out by the people who were supposed to protect you, you are not the only one. Your story is yours to tell, even if your voice shakes, even if no one believes you at first. The people who turn away don't get the final word. You do. Find the evidence. Keep it safe. And when you're ready, open the door yourself. I hovered over the post button for a moment before clicking it. The message went out into the world, small at first, then carried forward by strangers who understood. Some shared their own stories in the comments. Others simply wrote, "I hear you." I closed the laptop, the room quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The night outside was cool, but not biting, the kind of chill that reminds you you're alive, not in danger. I wasn't at a window anymore, waiting for someone to see me. I was on the other side, telling anyone who needed to hear it, "You're not alone," and that was enough.